Wake up. It's the Sleep Unplugged podcast, episode 105, Air Quality and Sleep. The air is finally safe to breathe again. Welcome, everyone, to the Sleep Unplugged podcast. My name is Chris Winter. I am a sleep specialist, neurologist, and most importantly, your host for a very important landmark episode of the Sleep Unplugged podcast. Yes, it's episode 105. This marks the 2-year anniversary, or as I've displayed behind me, the 2-year birthday of the podcast. I'm so excited. I never thought that it would come to this, and I'm really excited to celebrate 2 years of the Sleep Unplugged podcast with you. So that means that starting today, the music that we talk about on the podcast will begin volume 3 of the Sleep Unplugged podcast playlist that we have on Spotify. So if you're on Spotify, if you look up Sleep Unplugged playlist volume 1 and volume 2, you can see all the music we talked about during the first 2 years of the podcast. And since this begins season 3, we'll start a new Spotify playlist on there, and I'll talk about that musical artist in just a minute. If you want to get in touch with the show, wish us a happy birthday, talk about your favorite point, episode, thing that we've talked about over the last 2 years, you can reach us through Twitter, Dr. Chris Winter, Instagram, Dr. Chris Winter. We have a YouTube page where we post videos of all of our content. As I've mentioned before, we have the Spotify playlist. You can find us in a variety of ways. I've written 2 books about sleep, The Sleep Solution, Why Your Sleep's Broken and How to Fix It, as well as The Rested Child, Why Your Tired, Wired, or Irritable Child May Have a Sleep Disorder and How to Help That. Comments, corrections, criticisms. I've got a couple. The first is somebody wrote in and said, I didn't know you sold hats. I posted a adorable picture on our Instagram page, the Dr. Chris Winter Instagram page, of a listener who bought a hat recently and her son is wearing it, and it is really cute. You got to look that up. If you don't find it on the Instagram page, I'll put it under the Sleep Unplugged little tab where we put stuff from there. But yeah, we do sell hats, $25. Venmo me, however you want to get me the money, and we'll mail it out to you. And you can see a picture of it on my Twitter page. It's sort of pinned at the top of the Twitter page. A couple episodes ago, episode 103, we were detailing research from the 2024 Sleep Conference in Houston. And one of the abstracts I talked about was this fascinating little bit of research that came out of Auburn, where they actually looked at TikTok sleep tips, for a certain designated period of time. And basically the research said, look, these may not be, doctors and sleep specialists that are putting this content out, but they found that out of all the data they tested, only 2 of the TikTok sort of videos or the TikTok advice really didn't meet the criteria for being, helpful, real, evidence-based, but everything else was. So, as I mentioned in episode 103, I was dying to know, well, what were the 2 pieces of information, tips, sleep wisdom that wasn't evidence-based? So I contacted Brian Gillis, one of the authors of the paper at Auburn, and Brian immediately got back to me. I forgot to mention in last week's podcast. And he wrote, we had a correction to the abstract, and actually it was only one of the pieces of information that really didn't have data behind it. And that was, he said, we couldn't find any data on unmaking your bed when you get up in the morning. So apparently there is a TikTok sort of thread piece of advice that's basically saying when you wake up, leave your bed unmade and you'll sleep better. And he said, oddly enough, it's something that IKEA has been telling its customers to do, to let their down-filled comforters and sheets, quote, air out for an hour after waking, because the heat and the moisture from the body contribute to bacteria growth on the bedding. By not making the bed right away, the bedding cools down faster and less bacteria should accumulate between washings. And he wrote, so I think the TikToker was trying to say that we sleep better on clean sheets. And he says that part is actually true, but does not making your bed help you sleep better? Probably not. So I thought that was really interesting because on episode 100 of the podcast, we did 100 tips to help you sleep better. And one of them was get up in the morning and immediately make your bed. Be really interesting for Brian Gillis at Auburn to evaluate our 100 sleep tips and have his amazing Auburn sleep research staff evaluate the Sleep Unplugged 100 tips and determine of the 100 things that Chris is telling us to do in that episode, how many of them actually have evidence behind them. Maybe the making your bed immediately in the morning is not the best thing to do. But like he said, it's not a bad tip. He just couldn't find data to support that leaving your bed unmade for an hour or two would actually help you sleep better. But I think that there's some sense to it. I also wanted to call out Ellen Wormter. She's a sleep nurse practitioner who works in my clinic. She had 3 abstracts in the Houston sleep meeting this year, and I just think that's awesome. I had a sum total of 0. So Ellen, in addition to really carrying the weight of the Charlottesville Neurology and Sleep Medicine Clinic where we work, she's carrying the research weight as well too. So just wanted to give her a shout out. She's an excellent clinician. Give her a follow at Sleep NP. You can find her on Twitter and Instagram, etc. So we've come to the episode today, the birthday episode. Before we get into it, the topic, the title of the podcast, "The Air is Finally Safe to Breathe Again," is from a song by a group called Small Pools, formed in the early 2000s. Some guys from New Jersey and New York put it together, moved out to LA. And not a big group. This is a group that should have been more popular than they ended up being or are. I think they're a fantastic group. But I put this song on here because I found this song called Dreaming and loved it. Love the music video. You got to look up Small Pools Dreaming music video. I think it's so creative and fun. And there's also a great YouTube video of this group going into this very fancy theater that had a grand piano that automatically played itself. And they went in there, unplugged the grand piano, and played this song Dreaming, while all these moviegoers were kind of standing around, looking around like, what's going on? And finally the police came and said, okay, you got to stop. But it's a really cool video. But I like this song because the producer of the podcast, Maeve, and I really, really like it. We kind of found it and shared it with each other. Like, oh my God, this is a great song. Yeah, I know it is. So we'll start the Spotify playlist volume 3 with Dreaming by Small Pools. So let's get into this. So why are we here? I hear a lot of talk about air quality and sleep. And there's a couple things going on right now. I have purchased some air, filters for my home and am fairly disturbed when I clean the filters out what they look like. So I suppose something is being pulled out of the air, skin, dander from pets, dust, etc., whatever, debris. But is that actually helping to improve the quality of my sleep? Because I hear a lot of things that say that it is. And I'm going to tell you right now, my biggest media regret, and I'm still kind of a little frustrated by it, is I didn't some kind of interview and was on CNN. So I do a lot of interviews. I'm not typically on television. I mean, that happens every now and then, but usually it's, magazine, online kind of stuff. Anyway, I was on CNN and the way it was edited made me sound like I was saying air filtration makes you sleep better. And I'll never forget, I'm going to give a call out to Brad Vaughn, who was my fellowship director at Chapel Hill and sort of an oracle. And he gave me all kinds of great advice. Two that I remember very clearly. One was, don't do the lecture if you can't handle the aftermath. And I remember him saying that to me. I have no idea what that means. What that means is you do the lecture, and then all of a sudden, a whole bunch of people want something from you based upon that lecture. So he was always, be careful with that. The second thing he told me was, be careful with media interviews. He said, your words can be twisted to say a lot of things that you didn't really mean. I remember that one time talking to somebody about a potential thing that was going to happen with 60 Minutes that never did, but that was their advice too. Like, hey, listen, 60 Minutes is great, but they're also a television show trying to attract ratings. Be careful. Anyway, did this thing about air quality, and it made me sound like a complete loon, I think, because it made me sound like, forget exercise, forget good nutrition, forget mindfulness, just get an air purifier, you're going to sleep great. So, is it true? Is there any evidence that says that air purification will make you sleep better? So, that's part of this episode. The second part is I am not an indoor plant guy. However, we have just ordered a couple indoor plants from Easy Plant, and I'm plugging them even though I purchased these. I have no relationship whatsoever with Easy Plant, just given the way. And listen, I love green spaces. I love gardens. I've got a massive herb garden that I built and use it all the time. I'm really excited about my banana peppers, which I've already started pickling. So I love it. I'm just not a big fan of plants in the house. So then the question becomes, do plants in the house help with sleep? Are plants in the house providing some sort of air filtration that could help sleep? So this is really the genesis of this episode, which I thought would be kind of fun. So let's get into it. And once again, and we've talked about the sleep meeting in Houston now. We talked about it in episode 103, mentioned a little bit last week in episode 104, and here we are, episode 105. I looked up just for the hell of it, are there abstracts from the Houston meeting that dealt with air quality and sleep? And sure enough, from the University of Miami's Miller School of Medicine, Stacey Alvasarte, Judith Blanc, Aaron Lee Gallup, Bruno Oliveira, Azizi Siexis, Girardian Jean-Louis. I'm sorry, I'm butchering people's names, man. Really, really excited about the work you did. They did an abstract called Impact of Air Quality on Nocturnal Awakenings Among Blacks. And basically, they pulled data from two NIH-funded studies. Essential and Mosaic were the studies. And for a period of 7 days, 108 Black participants over the age of 18 monitored their indoor bedroom air quality using a device that allowed them to do that. And basically, what they showed was during this time period that individuals who had better air quality experienced fewer awakenings per sleep period. So the number of awakenings was moderately negatively correlated with the air quality. So the conclusion was the air quality could be a robust predictor of average nocturnal awakenings in the Black population. So that's really interesting. So there's some, data here suggesting that there could be relationships with the air quality that we're sleeping in and the way we sleep. So looking back in 2021 in the Journal of Sleep Medicine, there was an article entitled Comprehensive Review of the Current Literature on Impact of Ambient Air Quality and Sleep Quality. So overall, there were 15 studies included in this, featured about 134,000 subjects that were evaluated between ambient air pollution and sleep quality in 10 different countries. And one was the United States. Most included studies in the current review, most studies that were reviewed have shown that one or more air pollutants have negative influences on air quality. So there is evidence out there that says if we can sleep in an environment with better air quality, we tend to sleep better. So why would that be? There's several theories, and doesn't necessarily have to be one or the other. That central ventilatory systems in our brain are responding favorably when the air quality is good. And when you look at the control of breathing, the control of temperature, and the control of sleep in our brain, that real estate's pretty close together when we think about the areas of our central nervous system that control these things. So it's not a huge stretch to think when it's really hot, that could influence sleep. We know that's the case. Or when the air quality is very poor and it's influencing our breathing, it could have an impact on sleep. Other central nervous system uh, pathways could be affected, allergic and non-allergic mechanisms. So obviously, if there's something in the air that's making you cough, exacerbating asthma, making you sneeze, these could be influencing sleep quality and awakenings during the night. And then there's also associations between air pollution and certain chronic diseases, mental illness, cardiovascular disease, even behaviors like impulsivity. So a lot of theories as to why these things could be the case. So when you actually look at improving air quality, what does that do for sleep? And so in 2023, there was a UK study entitled Can Air Purification Improve Sleep Quality? A 2-week randomized. And since it's a UK study, they went with the randomized spelled with an S and not the American Z. Controlled crossover pilot study in healthy adults. The aim of this pilot study was to investigate the effects of using air purification on sleep outcomes and mood in 30 healthy adults. So it wasn't necessarily a large study. Participants were in one of two conditions with a 2-week washout in between. So basically, they were either sleeping in the air purification setting or the sham air purification setting. And basically, what they found was the purification filter. So when you actually had the air purifier that was real, it was associated with an increased total sleep time of for an average of about 12 minutes per night. So that group was sleeping 12 minutes more per night than the poor air quality condition, and increased total time in bed averaging 19 minutes per night versus the placebo. They did mention that there were several sleep and mood outcomes that they didn't see a difference in. And interestingly, time awake after sleep onset was higher with the purification filter than with the sham filter. So when you did wake up, you tended to be awake longer, maybe because the air was so fresh that you didn't really want to leave that experience right away. I have no idea. They weren't sure, but they had no real theories as to why that would be the case. There's a 2016 Danish study entitled The Effects of Bedroom Air Quality on Sleep and Next Day Performance, where they had individuals in one of two groups. One was an open window and had like a little ventilatory fan that would allow more CO2 and pollutants to escape than the other. And they felt like the next day participants who were in the better air quality group reported less sleepiness and a higher ability to concentrate and perform in tests of logical thinking when they slept in the higher air quality room than the lower air quality room. Now, it was interesting. There was another Danish study in 2023 looking at the effect of air quality on sleep and cognitive performance in school-age children, ages 10 to 12. It was a double-blinded, placebo-controlled crossover trial. In this study, they really couldn't show any improvements in that group of kids, whether the air was pure or not. So who knows? Kids are not as sensitive to it. They've got other things that are impacting their sleep much more, and we have to get outside of those things before this, small variable of air quality is going to show in a study some sort of improvement or not. So I thought that was really, really, really interesting. So I think it's safe to say that this is kind of one of those things where I'm going to bet based upon the way my air filters look, or are you all people that are really regimented about cleaning your air conditioner filter? I am super regimented about that, so, because I don't want to replace an air conditioning filter or air conditioning unit. So I'm really careful about that. And we recently were in a house that pulled out the air conditioning filter. I was new to this house, and I've never seen one so dirty in my life. So I don't think everybody is as interested in cleaning these filters maybe as I am, but I mean, it's amazing what you find on these filters. I mean, they're filthy. And so is there a health, just in general, a health benefit to breathing cleaner air? Almost certainly there is. I can't imagine somebody arguing that there wouldn't be. From a sleep perspective, I think there's some evidence that yes, I like that study indicating 12 minutes. You're getting 10 to 12 minutes more sleep than maybe you would have if the air quality were not good. So again, we talk a lot on this show about incremental changes. Let's make the air quality in our sleeping environment better. That adds, 5 or 10 minutes of better sleep to our night. Let's make our bed more comfortable. Let's, uh, our bed clothing, our pillow fit our body. We're going to add a sleep mask. We're going to eliminate alcohol. We're kind of back to the episode 100, right? The 100 things that you can do to maybe make your sleep a little bit better. If each one of those conservatively makes your sleep, gives you a 1 minute more of extra sleep, then these things really start to add up. So I think I'll put a check mark for what it's worth. I'm certainly no expert here on the air purification. I'm curious if you guys have used air purification in the past. What did you notice about your sleep? I can definitely tell a difference in terms of air quality in my home with air purifiers that I've found, and I don't have particularly expensive ones. I'm not sure that it's impacting my sleep heavily. I can't feel that. It might be. Maybe we'll do a little experiment where we shut them all off and let the air get dirty and see what happens. But I'd probably rather not do that. So anyway, so let's move on to plants. This one to me is a little bit more fringe. And like I said, I'm introducing plants into my home. I've got the ficus and we also have the mystical Madagascar Dracaena marginata, also known as the dragon tree. So these are the plants that we chose. We based them on aesthetics and size. That has nothing to do with air purification. But are they doing something? Could they really impact people's sleep based upon air purification? So I think that we have to kind of separate two things. Can the presence of potted plants make a difference in terms of somebody's sleep versus are they filtering the air that you breathe and that's what's making you sleep better? There was a 2024 study, it was a Chinese study entitled A Feasibility Study on Indoor Therapeutic Horticulture to Alleviate Sleep and Anxiety Problems, the Impact of Plants and Activity Choice on its Therapeutic Effect. And basically, they kind of created this term therapeutic horticulture and said that it was impactful when they looked at it in terms of helping people alleviate anxiety, particularly people with high anxiety levels. Using ornamental plants seemed to be more effective in relieving stress than aromatic plants. And each horticulture activity could improve mood state, but showed different effects on the vitality of the participants. So they're basically saying, look, we think that there are some benefits to just having plants in the room, particularly in individuals with high anxiety. And we know that anxiety is a big enemy when it comes to sleep. There was a 2021 study, it was Italian, entitled The Association Between Indoor and Outdoor Green Features and Psychological Health During the COVID-19 Lockdown in Italy, a cross-sectional nationwide study. The first sentence of that study was, exposure to public green spaces was shown to be associated with psychological health. That's straight out of our episode 53 on sleep and exposure to green spaces. Being able to look out your window and see the woods, spending time outdoors, spending times in parks, yoga in the park after your day of work. So they basically start the study out and say, look, we think and we know from research that there is evidence that exposure to green spaces can help sleep. So this was a cross-sectional nationwide study. Again, it was Italian, involving an online survey where they sampled approximately 3,000, 4,000 individuals. And they were asking about associations between indoor and outdoor green spaces, presence of planted pots, your exposure to sunlight, green views, accessibility to private green spaces. We were walking around. We were in Edinburgh, Scotland, and it was this beautiful park. And I said to my Uber driver, "Oh, what's this park here? What's it like?" He goes, "Oh, I wouldn't know." He goes, "Those are for the posh people." So this was like an enclosed, it was a big park, but it was for the buildings on the other side of the road. You could walk across the street and you could access this park, but they weren't open to the public. So, again, we've talked about equity in sleep. Here's equity and access to green spaces in Edinburgh, Scotland, perhaps. So they were looking at all these exposures to nature with respect to self-reported increases in anxiety, anger, fear, confusion, moodiness, boredom, irritability, recurrent thoughts in our dreams, poor concentration, and sleep disturbances. And it is worth noting these were happening during the COVID lockdown. So in their models, what they found were a few things. Number one, the presence of planted pots at home was associated with lower self-reported increases in anxiety, anger, fear, irritability, and sleep disturbances. And I kind of chuckled when I saw anger because my first thought was people getting angry and throwing the potted plant in the house and smashing it against the wall. That wasn't happening apparently. Apparently the planted pot protects itself against your anger, apparently. Number two, a greater amount of sunlight in the home was associated with lower increases in anger, fear, confusion, moodiness, boredom, irritability, poor concentration, and sleep disturbances. That really goes back, I think, to light in general that we talk about. I think it was one of our 100 tips. Get up in the morning and expose yourself to light. Get outside. If you can't get outside, get into a light part of your home. That this does have effects on not only health, but also sleep. Greater amount of green view and access to private green spaces were associated with lower increases in each of the psychological health outcomes, except for green view and recurrent thoughts and or dreams. And apparently that really didn't have much of an effect on recurring thoughts and dreams, especially probably recurring thoughts and dreams of being in green spaces. Again, that's a guess. And then the final one was natural outdoor environment was associated with anxiety, reduces in anxiety, fear, boredom, irritability, and sleep disturbances. So across the board, any way you can get green into your life seems to have a positive effect on sleep. Now, the big question, is it because green plants are filtering the air that we breathe? There have been studies indicating that yes, they do. I saw a study called Mitigation of Indoor Air Pollutants using the Areca, Areca palm potted plants in real life settings. A closer look at that study indicated that it may be funded by people who are, mass producing these plants and giving them to people. To me, I think the study that resonated the most was a 2020 Drexel study entitled "Potted Plants Do Not Improve Air Quality: A Review and Analysis of Reported VOC Removal Efficiencies." This was authored by Brian Cummings and Michael Waring. And so basically, they did a very controlled study of looking at how single plants were able to remove pollutants, including VOCs, the volatile organic compounds. You buy the mattress, you buy the carpet, you buy the indoor paint, and it off gases. And people are very concerned about these organic compounds. And you can buy the low emission paints and buy your mattress and let it sit outside for a week in your garage and let the off gassing occur before you bring it into your house, etc. I'm assuming new car smell, which I love, is probably a festival of VOCs entering into your body. So basically, they did a study and said, look, potted plant does not do anything in terms of removing VOCs. You're better off just opening a window and getting a fan. You're going to remove way more volatile organic compounds by installing some sort of ventilatory system, even a simple one, than planting plants. In fact, they said, if we're trying to remove VOCs at a high level and indoor pollutants, we're talking about placing somewhere between 10 to 1,000 plants per meter square surface area within a building. So literally the entire building could be crammed with plants, and it's still probably not going to reduce as many VOCs as if you just crack a window and put a fan in it. So, again, all for the plants. I think there's plenty of benefits from it, but I think that if you're concerned about air quality, there may be better ways to improve it than putting a plant in there, even though we know plants are pulling in CO2 and releasing oxygen. So I don't think that there's necessarily a big problem with it. I think relying on the green plant that you've purchased to filter the air you're breathing is probably not happening on the order of magnitude that we need it to happen in order to make a difference. So that's it. Tell me about your plants that you have in your house. Tell me about the air filtration systems you use, what you found in relationship to your sleep. You can contact the show, Dr. Chris Winter Instagram, Dr. Chris Winter Twitter. Find us on YouTube. Our YouTube page has all the videos of our content. Books, Sleep Solution, and The Rested Child are available anywhere where books are sold. We have trucker hats. Want to celebrate the third birthday of the podcast, the second birthday of the podcast, beginning of the third year of the podcast by buying a trucker hat. Let me know. And until next week, sleep well.